20 years ago, this man claimed that SpaceX would never go public. This year he has changed his stance. More than just a change of heart, he is now orchestrating the largest initial public offering in human history, targeting $1.75 trillion. However, there is something you might not have noticed. SpaceX is short on funds. They are expected to generate over $16 billion in revenue by 2025 and already possess more than $3 billion in cash reserves. Their launch contracts extend well into the future. The Starlink satellite broadband service alone generates annual revenues exceeding $10 billion, with a profit margin as high as 54%. Given such profitability, why is this company seeking capital from the public? The answer is more intriguing than you might imagine. Musk's ambitions extend far beyond rocket building. His destination isn't just the moon or low Earth orbit. It is Mars. A manned mission to Mars would require billions, perhaps trillions of dollars, far beyond what even the monopolization of global broadband via Starlink could finance. Estimates suggest a single complete crewed Mars mission could cost between $300 billion and $6 trillion, an expenditure that defies commercial logic, representing instead a gamble on the future of civilization. Musk is now inviting you to bet alongside him. He has devised a scheme allocating 30% of shares specifically for retail investors, over 3 times the conventional Wall Street practice. His target isn't institutional investors, but rather individuals like you. Meanwhile, he retains nearly 80% voting power. You provide capital while he makes decisions. In essence, what you purchase is not merely stock but a ticket to an interstellar plan where your voice holds no sway. Who is profiting from this IPO? Who is bearing the risk? Why are the world's smartest venture capitalists rushing to sell their shares to you now? Let's start at the beginning. You need to understand one thing. SpaceX is not just a company. It is 2 companies under one shell. One is SpaceX, which launches rockets for NASA, military satellites, and commercial clients, essentially delivering goods into orbit. This business is impressive, handling over half of global rocket launches. However, its growth potential is limited, the market size is finite, and there are few clients. The other company is Starlink, which is where the real issues lie. You might think Starlink is just a premium satellite network for remote areas or yachts, but when the financial data for 2025 came out, many realized how significant this operation truly was. That year, Starlink generated over $10 billion in revenue, accounting for about 70% of SpaceX's total income, with profit margins reaching an astounding 54%. By comparison, Apple's margin is roughly 26%, making it one of the world's top consumer brands, but Starlink's profits are double that. Why does it make so much money? Because it has driven costs to unprecedented lows. Initially priced at $3,000 for a receiver terminal, the cost was later slashed to $349. This is achieved by SpaceX manufacturing satellites in-house, launching them themselves, and building their own network infrastructure. Controlling the entire supply chain, they do not negotiate terms with anyone. Their pricing strategy is even more ruthless. Residential broadband service costs around $2,000 a year, which seems fairly standard. However, for shipping companies, it's $34,000 annually. For airlines, each aircraft incurs $300,000 a year. The same network, vastly different pricing tiers. United Airlines has signed on, John Deere is a client, and the Pentagon uses a secure version of Starlink called Starshield. By early 2026, Starlink had over 9,500 active satellites in orbit, constituting 2/3 of the roughly 15,000 active satellites globally. This is not merely competitive advantage, it is physical monopoly. What about their main competitor? Amazon's Project Kuiper has invested several $billion to challenge them head-on, but by early 2026, they only had over 200 satellites in orbit compared to SpaceX's 9,500. Just before its IPO, Starlink drastically reduced prices and was even reported to be distributing free terminals to distributors. Musk posted on social media that this was intended for the impoverished in developing countries. Analysts suggest this move was aimed at preemptively triggering a price war before Amazon's product launches, effectively eliminating any market before it opens. Therefore, SpaceX's confidence does not stem from rockets. Instead, it comes from Starlink, a machine that reliably churns out billions in annual profits. It is this very machine that gives Musk the leverage to discuss a valuation of $1.75 trillion and allows him to confidently tell everyone before going public that they are not short on funds, they are merely aiming for something bigger. But what exactly is this larger endeavor? That is where the story truly becomes complicated. In February 2026, Musk sent an internal email to all SpaceX and XI employees announcing a merger between the two companies. The initial reaction from the public was that of a grand technological integration, combining rockets with AI to create orbiting data centers powered by solar energy in space, a concept that sounded very futuristic. However, financial analysts raised their eyebrows as they reviewed XAI. XAI, founded by Musk in 2023, is an artificial intelligence company featuring a large language model called Grok, which competes directly with OpenAI and Google. The issue is the alarming rate at which this company burns through capital. In Q3 of 2025, XAI's quarterly revenue was slightly over $100 million, while its operational losses for the same quarter reached $150 million. This means that for every dollar earned, it spent $15. Over the previous 9 months, XAI generated nearly $8 billion in negative cash flow. Where did the money go? Primarily, it was spent on GPU servers, electricity, and constructing Glossis, a super data center in Memphis. In essence, this company is a bottomless pit that has now been integrated into SpaceX. Post-merger, XII's losses are no longer reported as an independent entity, but absorbed into the vast consolidated financial statements of SpaceX. Starlink's profits of over $10 billion are now being used to cover for XAI's deficits, a maneuver known euphemistically as internal market rescue. More concerning is that Musk holds a significantly higher personal stake in XI compared to his shareholding in SpaceX. He has effectively embedded an almost insolvent company into another high-quality entity with substantial external investors, then plans to raise $75 billion globally through the IPO of the newly merged entity. Some have put it bluntly, retail investors' money from the stock market may not be going towards rocket manufacturing, but rather towards buying GPUs and paying electricity bills to sustain a large model, competing against OpenAI. Officially, however, this merger is portrayed as an initiative to build orbital AI data centers, launching compute nodes into space, using inexhaustible solar energy in outer space for power, and transmitting data through Starlink's laser links. This would ostensibly resolve the electrical and cooling bottlenecks faced by Earth-based data centers. The vision certainly sounds awe-inspiring, however, when engineers examined the proposal, they raised a very practical question. There is no air or water in space. On Earth, data centers rely on airflow and liquid cooling for heat dissipation. Both methods fail in a vacuum environment. The only viable method of cooling is thermal radiation, but its efficiency is extremely low and must strictly adhere to the Stefan-Boltzmann law. Calculations show that dissipating 1 megawatt of waste heat requires approximately 1,200 square meters of radiative cooling panels. Musk claims he will provide tens of watts of AI computing power. A few tens of watts equates to 1,000 terawatts. A watt or two is 1,000 terawatts, and tens of watts amount to 10 million terawatts. How large would the cooling panels need to be? You can do the math yourself. The CEO of Voyager Technologies was blunt. Musk's timeline is overly ambitious and unrealistic. The industry has yet to resolve the core challenge of heat dissipation in microgravity environments. This is the current situation. A profitable cash-rich satellite broadband company has merged with an AI firm that burns through money at an alarming rate, packaging a space computing vision that is currently unfeasible from a physical standpoint and is valued at $1.75 trillion to sell to the world. However, this does not mean SpaceX lacks value. Starlink represents real rocket monopoly and genuine launch capability. However, how much of the $1.75 trillion is backed by solid business operations? How much of it is merely a cover up for XI and stories told to retail investors? This is where the crux of this IPO lies. More importantly, it is Musk's carefully crafted IPO structure that truly reveals who controls the rules in this game. Early investors like Google, Redpoint Ventures, and Founders Fund have endured countless setbacks with Musk, including the disastrous failures of Falcon 1 launches. Over a decade has passed since those fiery explosions on the Texas plains. SpaceX is now valued at $1.75 trillion, but the money remains on paper because it is still a private company without an open market. No matter how impressive your financial statements look, they can't be converted into actual cash. This is why an IPO must occur. It is not that Musk needs money, it is that those who have waited for over a decade need to find a way out. The question remains who will take on this burden. You are the answer. However, the design of this scheme is far more intricate than you might imagine. Let's start with the underwriting arrangement. In a typical IPO, investment banks allocate 90% or more of the shares to institutional investors, such as mutual funds, hedge funds, and pension funds. What about retail investors? They would usually receive no more than 5 to 10%. However, SpaceX has reserved 30% for retail investors. The intricacies of this allocation underscore a strategic move aimed at broadening its shareholder base, while maintaining significant control over the company's direction post-IPO. This figure exceeds traditional norms by more than 3 times. On the surface, it appears that Musk is repaying the public, giving his fans a chance to participate in this audacious venture. However, consider why such a move would be necessary. Institutional investors are professionals. They use financial models to list SpaceX's losses, risks associated with new projects, and valuation bubbles, demanding discounts during the pricing stage. Retail investors do not behave this way. Instead, they are drawn to Musk and Mars, seeking to participate in what feels like a pivotal moment in human history. They tend to hold their shares long-term and rarely sell. Retail investors play 2 critical roles within SpaceX's capital structure. First, they act as stabilizers. As early institutional investors like Google gradually reduce their holdings post-IPO, someone must absorb these shares, otherwise the stock price could crash. Retail investors fulfill this role. Second, they serve as catalysts. Once SpaceX is listed at such a scale, it will quickly be included in Nasdaq -100 and S&P 500 indices. This inclusion compels passive funds globally that track these indices to mechanically buy SpaceX shares driven by their investment mandates rather than voluntary decisions. Your pension accounts or index funds may already have exposure without your awareness. SpaceX plans to float only about 3 to 5% of its stock, creating a high demand with limited supply. Consequently, prices are artificially driven up. Early investors successfully offloaded their passive funds at inflated prices, leaving retail investors to take the fall. This design was not accidental but meticulously planned. Investment banks then orchestrated the process. SpaceX did not follow traditional bidding models. Instead, each bank was allocated a narrow lane, tasked with specific roles without overlap. Bank of America handled domestic retail and high net worth clients in the US. Morgan Stanley interfaced with small retail investors through its E-Trade platform. Citigroup integrated international institutional and retail orders, and UBS served affluent overseas individuals and family offices. RBC Capital Markets, Barclays and Deutsche Bank were respectively responsible for regional distribution in Japan, the UK and Germany. Each investment bank operated within its designated lane, with no room to question pricing or influence allocation. All decision-making power remained internal at SpaceX. This is Musk leveraging Wall Street as a tool rather than submitting himself to it, but this was merely the outer defense. The core lay within the equity structure. Post-IPO, Class A shares available to the public have 1 vote per share, whereas Musk and key executives hold Class B shares with 10 votes or even 20 votes per share. Currently, Musk holds 42% of the economic equity, but wields nearly 79% of voting power. regardless of how much stock retail investors purchase or the sizable positions held by institutions post-IPO. In any decision involving corporate strategy, they have virtually no substantive say. The board members are chosen by Musk. Spending billions to reach Mars is decided by Musk. Whether to continue funding XI is also Musk's call. You may invest money, but you have no influence over the company's future direction. Musk learned this lesson at Tesla. Back then, Tesla had a single equity structure with Musk holding only about 11% of shares, leaving him vulnerable to pressure from activist investors, short sellers, and Wall Street's jealous scrutiny of financial reports. He did not want SpaceX to go through the same ordeal again, so he rewrote the rules this time around. You can buy a ticket to join in, but it is not a democracy. Money belongs to the public. Decisions are made by Musk alone. To further secure this structure, for the merger of XI, Musk established a holding entity in Nevada. The state has recently revised laws that provide extremely favorable protection to company executives and controlling shareholders. Even if minority shareholders believe the merger is a conflict of interest and wish to sue, they face high legal hurdles. In other words, this structure legally silences any dissenting voices from the start. Now let's put all of this together. Starlink functions like a money printing machine, adding credibility to the narrative. Xi represents the loss-making black hole that needs cover up. This structure has been fed into a money printing machine. Retail investors act like pre-designed buffer storage, both absorbing shares and stabilizing stock prices, forming the base of faith. Early-stage investors have realized decades of paper wealth through this IPO, while passive funds are forced to buy due to index rules, becoming unwitting takers. After all this, Musk still holds 79% voting rights, allowing him to continue pouring billions into his never-abandoned Martian desert. Those who profit are the early-stage capital that has waited for decades. Those with power are solely Musk, and those bearing the cost are ordinary people who believe in this story. However, this narrative is not yet complete, as behind such meticulous design lie several time bombs ready to explode at any moment. Let's discuss these time bombs. The first one lies deep within the equity structure. In 2025, an independent investigative agency called ProPublica unearthed a secret from declassified court documents. SpaceX, which carries out top-secret spy satellite launches for the US Department of Defense, once attempted to secretly accept funding from Chinese investors. Specifically, in 2021, a Chinese company called Leo Group tried to inject $50 million into SpaceX. The documents reveal that SpaceX was well aware of the source of this money and even suggested not publicly disclosing SpaceX's name, proposing instead to use an offshore structure through the Cayman Islands for the transaction. Evading regulatory scrutiny, due to concerns over leaks, SpaceX hastily halted the transaction. Once this matter came to light, the US Congress erupted in outrage. Multiple members of both the House Armed Services Committee and the Science and Technology Committee jointly wrote to the Secretary of Defense and NASA Administrator, demanding a thorough investigation into whether SpaceX had concealed ties with Chinese capital during its bid for a $13 billion defense launch contract. This company launches American military satellites using rockets while secretly seeking Chinese investment and actively designing strategies to evade oversight. This is not an inadvertent mistake, but a deliberate choice. The second revelation was even more overt, to the point of numbing observers. In 2025, Musk was appointed as co-chair of the Department of Government Efficiency, securing special status as a government employee and gaining substantial influence over budgets and personnel across federal agencies. This is the timeline. On the 21st of February, 2025, NASA announced that SpaceX Falcon 9 would launch an approximately $100 million near-Earth sky probe mission. 3 days later, the Federal Aviation Administration announced it was considering replacing Virgin's existing $2.4 billion aviation weather system contract with Starlink terminals. Shortly after, thousands of Starlink terminals were rapidly installed in Alaska and New Jersey, even preparing to directly cancel competitors' contracts, sitting simultaneously in a government position while also being a major beneficiary shareholder. Senators and representatives used the term corruption bias. They claim that Musk is leveraging his government position to divert federal budgets into his private companies, constituting systematic regulatory capture. But do you know what is most absurd? This entire process is happening in plain sight, with no attempt at concealment by anyone involved. The timeline is clear and visible for all to see. The third bombshell comes from the scientific community. Musk announced plans to launch 1 million satellites to build orbital AI data centers. Currently, there are approximately 15,000 active satellites in orbit, making Musk's plan nearly 70 times that number. Astronomers have formally protested to the FCC, stating that this massive number of reflective metal bodies would not just impact but utterly destroy ground-based optical astronomical observations. The ability of humans to gaze upon a pristine night sky for thousands of years will be fundamentally stripped away. But the issue extends beyond mere visual concerns. Orbital safety is far more severe. Such densely packed satellite constellations, if involved in a chain reaction collision, could generate over 100 million microscopic fragments. This phenomenon is known as Kessler syndrome. Once triggered, near-Earth orbit would be closed off to all of humanity, not just to certain nations. No further launches into space would be possible, cutting off the physical pathways for space exploration potentially for centuries. Compromising global space resources for a company. SAI computational dominance is not merely a risk warning. This is a real physical scenario. Another thing that many people have not noticed is that SpaceX's balance sheet holds 8285 bitcoins, which amounts to approximately $850 million based on the market price at the beginning of 2026. Why bring this up? Once SpaceX goes public and becomes part of the S&P 500 index, passive funds tracking this index will be forced to hold SpaceX's stock, which includes a significant position in bitcoins. This means that your pension fund index investments could indirectly hold cryptocurrency assets without your knowledge. Following its listing, SpaceX is not just a space stock but also one of the largest shadow holders of Bitcoin globally. Volatility in both markets will converge here. Let us consider several interconnected events. A company that launches spy satellites for the US Department of Defense secretly tried to accept Chinese capital. An individual holding key government positions funneled federal contracts to their own firm. A satellite program that could trigger a space blockade affecting all humanity is currently seeking regulatory approval, and a stock about to be included in every index fund quietly carries a position in bitcoins. These are not conspiracy theories. Each event has documents, timelines, and public statements from the parties involved. However, they are overshadowed by the grand narrative of humans becoming a multi-planetary species, the staggering $1.75 trillion valuation, and the participation induced by the 30% retail investor allocation. Most people see only the ticket to Mars, but no one tells you what is printed on the back of that ticket. Another frustrating reality is that even if you have no intention of buying SpaceX stock today, you might already be invested in it indirectly. We previously mentioned that SpaceX holds 8,285 bitcoins on its balance sheet. Many see this as just a minor detail, something only relevant to the crypto community. However, I believe this is worth elaborating on because it transforms more than just the nature of SpaceX stock. Consider how much money worldwide is managed through index funds, specifically passive investments, tracking the S&P 500 exceed $10 trillion. This doesn't even include those tracking Nasdaq or global markets. The operational logic behind these funds is straightforward. Buy whatever is in the index without questioning why or making judgments. They simply execute mechanically. Once SpaceX joins the S&P 500, a portion of that $10 trillion will automatically flow into SpaceX shares. With bitcoins on SpaceX's balance sheet, it means that people who have invested in conservative and stable index funds, retirement accounts, systematic investment plans, even lazy portfolios, are indirectly holding bitcoins without their knowledge. This is not an active choice but rather a consequence of the fund's automatic rebalancing process. Delve deeper. After SpaceX's IPO, if it officially announces that Bitcoin is part of its strategic reserves, the symbolic significance would extend far beyond those 8285 coins. When Tesla declared its ownership of Bitcoin, the entire market was electrified, with coin prices skyrocketing within days. With SpaceX being several times larger than Tesla, a single announcement could dismantle the last psychological barrier between the cryptocurrency market and traditional stock markets, making sentiment in both markets interlink in real time. A drop in Bitcoin would lead to a decline in SpaceX's value. If SpaceX falters, a portion of the S&P 500 would follow suit. When the S&P 500 dips, everyone's index funds will also lose ground. This intricate chain reaction stretches from space down into your phone's investment app, forming an invisible domino effect. You don't need to buy even one Bitcoin, open a trading account, or understand blockchain technology. Simply by investing in index funds, you are already part of this game. I have a question for you. If someone offered you the chance to invest in humanity's greatest adventure, how would you respond? Most people's instinctive reaction is to jump at the opportunity. This is precisely where things get ingenious. Musk is selling stocks, he is selling an identity. By investing in SpaceX, you are not just a financier, you are a participant in the leap of human civilization into the stars. You will be one of those millions of ordinary people who collectively invested, briefly mentioned in future history books. This story is more powerful than any financial model. However, you also know the other side of it. Starlink is indeed a cash mint, but within its $1.75 trillion valuation lies an AI company that burns $15 for every dollar earned. The dual-class share structure ensures that while you invest, you have no say in decisions. The 30% small investor quota is designed to absorb the paper wealth accumulated over decades by early investors. The vision of orbital data centers sounds promising, but the physical challenges of heat dissipation are yet unresolved. This does not mean Musk is a fraud. He may genuinely believe in the Mars mission and see it as a worthy endeavor. However, believing in a vision and buying into it at such valuations are two different things. There have been many historical moments like this. At the peak of the internet bubble, the internet was real, broadband existed, and e-commerce was present, but those who bought in often waited over a decade to break even, with some never recovering their investment. The technology may be genuine, but that does not equate to fair pricing. No matter how compelling the story, it does not change the fact that you could be left holding the bag. This IPO has clear winners, the venture capital firms that entered at costs of only a few dozen dollars per share in 2021 have multiplied their returns nearly tenfold when you invested at $526 each. They cashed out and moved on. You provide the liquidity. Wall Street calls this exiting liquidity, which simply means they cash out and you take over.